Welcome to the Memory Alpha podcast. We are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Star Trek Wiki. Today with Alex, known as Schisma on Memory Alpha, who is a wiki person.
I'm a wiki person. I contribute to wikis in general.
Author Andy talking about his book, We Have Engaged the Borg.
So I wrote it along with my co-author Eric Muirhead.
And the legendary Bernd Schneider telling us more about how the Star Trek fandom evolved since the 1990s.
Noticed all the changes from this first generation to the next generation to newest generation.
And of course with Jan and Florian. For me, back in the days with TNG, the Borg were some of the ultimate enemies. So there's nothing against the Borg. You can't defend yourself against the Borg. And I think the production noted this at some time, that the Borg were too strong. Andy, what are your thoughts about the Borg?
I describe the Borg as a Lovecraftian horror in the sense that they are, in TNG, they're effectively unknowable. There's a quote in the book where we have Dr. Pulaski saying, she can't tell you what is a Borg. You know, is a Borg the nanobot? Is it the drone? Is it the ship? You know, is it collective?
Yeah.
You know, this is the sense about the Borg. In TNG, the Borg really are. They are an unstoppable Lovecraftian kind of horror. But to try and comprehend it will truly drive you insane. By the time we get to Voyager, they're just filling up a week. And I think that's kind of tragic, you know. I understand why they brought the Borg Queen in for First Contact, but the second you start, you know, humanizing it, in a sense, you give it a structure you can kind of understand. You rob it of that mystery and, you know, that sense of menace to it. It was, you know, Q is still to this day one of the great episodes of Star Trek, and the way the Borg get introduced in the sense of, you know, you can't differentiate between the drones in their alcoves and the ships itself. You know, they are one and the same. It's effectively the ship is sending its white blood cells out to attack you. And that is what I really wanted to try and capture some of that sense into it as well. We have some sections in the book where we interview Q as a former Borg, trying to describe a Borg perspective and what the collective is like as well. There was also a bit where we have Data when he plugs into the collective to put them to sleep. And I was trying to write that, and it's like, well, I don't know how to describe that because I can't possibly understand that. So I just had Data basically say, I can't. It's like trying to explain red to someone who is blind. You know, you just the words just don't exist. So for me, the Borg are at their best when they're an unknowable force that is just kind of beyond a comprehension. So we kind of modeled the book off of Studs Terkel book, The Good War. Or what's probably more commonly known is World War Z by Max Brooks. But effectively what it is it's a series of interviews, and the interviews tell you the story of the first encounter with the Borg at Q-Who. Well, no, that's complicated, but it tells you from Q-Who, and there's interviews with people like Guinan, like Sonia Gomez, who was on the Enterprise at the time there. We have interviews with the President's Chief of Staff. There's interviews with people, and so the first couple of chapters are just kind of like introducing to the world, and you know, what was the Federation like before the Borg showed up. We have an interesting Romulan perspective throughout the book as well, because you know the Borg come in from Romulan space. In the episode The Neutral Zone, we have the Romulans show up, and they're saying, "Well, someone's stolen all of our colonies as well." And if there's something, I don't know if people have perhaps clocked onto this, but the Romulans are very au fait with Borg technology. You know, in Picard, they have the Artifact, which is a Borg cube that they've forgotten. In the '09 films, the Nevada is a Romulan mining vessel retrofitted with Borg technology. So there's a lot going on with the Romulans and Borg that no one's talking about. So we decided to talk about that. And we kind of weave it. So if you read the book, it will tell you the story from the beginning to kind of post. It's framed from an author's perspective who's looking back at the events 30 years later. And we kind of set that a few years before Picard season 1, and we have a little coda section where we finally have an interview with Jean-Luc Picard after Picard season 1, where he kind of has come to terms with the reality of himself as an XP. But yeah, it's just interviews from various people. When you get into the Wolf 359 section, though, we also include flight data recorders. So if you remember in Star Trek 3, Kirk is reviewing the flight data recorders from the Enterprise to see that. We think about the 24th century, these are fully immersive holographic simulations effectively. So you can put you right in the place of the ships at Wolf 359 to see what happens. So that's pretty horrific. I made a lot of people cry reading those sections. So
you didn't write the book on your own. How many did you do it with a co-author, and how long did you work on the book?
So I wrote it along with my co-author Eric Muirhead, who is an active U.S. Army colonel. I think he's a colonel. If you're not a colonel, Eric, I'm sorry, but it's U.S. ranks. I worked with him as my co-author for the most part of it. We split things fairly evenly. You know, I'd write stuff and send it over to him. He'd write stuff and send it back to me. We also had some other contributors. There's John Conker, who writes The Edge of Midnight, which is a historical retelling of the Federation Klingon Cold War from Discovery and Enterprise. He wrote a lot of the appendices and things for us, which are in the world, in the real world. Chaim Mardikian, who writes a series of books called the Oniaka 3 Project, which is about the XBs after Picard and everything that happens there. He contributed stuff and kind of punched up the Hugh sections to give them a bit more insight and telling there. And Claude Berreby, who is the director of the US Navy Academy Museum, he wrote a section talking about some of the lessons learned after Wolf 359 and, you know, how the Defiant came about, basically. There was a few people contributed towards the book. Thomas Maroney, who does a lot of the stuff on Star Trek Online. He designed the Enterprise F as well. He was a consultant kind of throughout. You know, he'd feed back with ideas and stuff. Just to make sure when I was saying things like the Akira class was around before Wolf 359, he was going like, yes, of course it was. So yeah, we were happy with that.
Yeah. And did you start with individual articles and then glue them together into the overarching, or did you first design the overall arc and then filled in the gaps? We
always knew, you know, the battle itself is kind of like, we knew that was kind of front and center in the book. So we knew that was going to be there. I think the first interview I actually wrote was, I think it was Sonia Gomez. I think I wrote Gomez's one was the first one I wrote, because she's there in Q Who. And you know, she's on the, you know, she's a young officer. She spills hot cocoa on Picard, and then all of a sudden she's dealing with the Borg and 18 of her friends being killed. And so that was kind of like to give you that ground floor perspective of what are the Borg like when you don't know about the Borg. I also did a Guinan interview as well, because, you know, we know Guinan has a history with the Borg, as do the Elorians, and so we went through that. So we kind of had a rough sense of the overarching, you know, beats that we wanted to hit, but we didn't necessarily know the interviewees we were going to have. It was, we wanted as much as possible to avoid interviewing people who are very prominent in the episode, because you can see that in the episode, you can go and watch it. There's some instances where we have to do that because, you know, only Worf and Data go onto the Borg cube to retrieve Locutus, so one of them has to do that bit. But that aside, we tried to tell perspectives and interview people who aren't necessarily present in the episodes and kind of around the periphery.
About the Borg Queen, do you include the Borg
we don't
Queen?
mention the Queen at all. There's not Queen in our book.
Okay. Huh?
I mean, that's not to saying it's not there. It's just from the perspective of the people who are being interviewed.
Bernd, you're the oldest and the most senior member of the Star Trek community in this panel. Let's talk a little bit, how did the Star Trek vibe, the Star Trek fandom change from the early days to now? Because at the moment we are talking about the Borg, the Wolf 359 incident, which was in the TNG area. We already talked a little bit about the Voyager area. Alex or Shizma joined the fandom in the Voyager time, is it?
I started watching about that time, yes.
Yeah. So, Bernd, I think you started with TOS, with the original series.
Actually, yes. I was already present when it first aired in Germany in 1973. And of course, I noticed all the changes from this, let's say, first generation to the next generation to the newest generation. So in these three eras, I can't tell much about fandom of the 70s and 80s. 70s, I was too young. 80s, I was not so much into it. One reason is stuff was hard to come by. You could buy books. You had to wait until something was shown on TV. You could buy video cassettes that were quite expensive at the time. 1996 was the year when I got connected, and the year that started it all, and was pretty early because the earliest news groups, okay, they date back to the early 90s, but the online fandom was created mid 1990s with the first websites. I participated pretty early on, and then launched my own site. What was the fandom like online? It was in discussion forums, news groups. It was websites. People were happy if they could find pictures. Could find news. Everything was somehow more valuable than it is today.
You told me earlier you were buying magazines at a special bookstore, imported magazines back in the time.
Yeah, it was. I got the Star Trek, the magazine from USA. A fellow fan bought them and sent them to me for a couple of years, and that was an opportunity for me to get more first-hand information, because at that time there were no good official channels. There was a StarTrek.com website, but with little news and no real database. This magazine had interviews, had those news, and had those schematic diagrams that I loved to scan and publish at EAS.
Andy, when did you start to get in contact with the fandom? Did you get in contact with Star Trek via the television series, or did you buy the DVDs, or?
So one of my earliest memories is the Enterprise moving past Jupiter in the motion picture with its yellow navigation deflector before it turns blue when it goes to warp. Because my parents were huge Star Trek fans, and we had the motion picture on VHS at a time when it cost something like £80 to have a VHS tape. But these were not, cheap things to have. So Star Trek's been a part of my life pretty much, as long as I have been around. When we were at junior school, we had to build spaceships for an event, and everyone's building like rockets, out of juice bottles and all that. I built the Enterprise out of 2 paper plates, a McDonald's cup, a Robinson's juice bottle, 2 bits of cardboard, and a couple of toothpaste boxes on the side, with an egg cup on top from a bridge, because you have to have a bridge on the top there. When I was at school, I was, shall we say, the fat kid. I wasn't popular. I wasn't good at sport. So I would sit in the playground reading the Star Trek: The Next Generation technical manual. So, I will happily say that I was definitely into Star Trek for the longest possible time. So when I moved into online space and online communities, the first ones I sought out were the Star Trek ones. I used to frequent a website called spacebattles.com, which had people who would have videos of like the Battlestar Galactica fighting against Omegas from Babylon 5 and ships from Star Trek. And I ended up running that site for a little while after that. I won't claim I've been in the fandom since day one. Obviously, I wasn't there for the original series, but certainly in terms of the online spaces, I've pretty much been there since the online spaces were there to a certain extent, one way or the other.
And Alex, how did you transition to the online spaces and meet the fandom there? That eventually then led you to Memory Alpha?
Pretty much with Memory Alpha, the German Memory Alpha. Yes, that was like my like the first time I maybe had discussions with other fans. Back then, official websites didn't provide any really interesting things. That changed with the what they call the Web 2.0. I don't know, when everyone started to contribute stuff and not only like people who hosted stuff, like official sources. I don't know. I can remember vividly, like diagrams of like made up ships, and I like right now I'm asking myself, where did they take the information from? Maybe I just learned from like, there was a description of it somewhere, and someone decided to make a crude pixel graphic that somehow found its way on websites that described ships and ship classes. I think I was into a website, also a German website, that tried to get information on all the ships. Just like, we have the registry numbers, so we approximately know how many ships there are, and we know that like certain classes of ships are in specific ranges of registry numbers, and that was super interesting to me. Like, maybe it speaks to like how fleshed out the universe was already back then.
And did you participate in some forums then later on?
Like, I'm a wiki person. I contribute to wikis in general.